It's fine. Hi, everyone. This is Danny Haifong, and I, of course, am joined by Margaret Kimberly, co-host of The Left Lens. And so I'll let folks come on. Margaret is sharing up. We have a little bit of an echo. Left Lens. And so I'll let folks. Hold on one second. Margaret, I think we have a bit of an echo on your side.
Oh, I'm sorry. My fault. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. All right, I'm checking. No, it's coming from me.
Oh.
Hold on. It might be from.
I see us.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my audio. Hold on one second. Okay. Oh, I know what it is. I was on YouTube at the same time. Isn't that awesome? Well, audience, as you can see, we're still working out technical kinks, but again, this is The Left Lens, and we have a very special guest. But before we get to our very special guest, I do have a few announcements as people come into the stream. First is a sad one, and I know Margaret knew him very well. In March, we had a great interview with Lukman Nation, and unfortunately, Abdus Baba Lukman, one half of Lukman Nation, died last week, June 15th. And so it's with a very heavy heart that we announced this. And he was a very dear comrade of all of us. I never got to meet him personally. I know he was very involved in the Black Alliance for Peace. Lukman Nation was doing such incredible work and will still do such incredible work, living on his legacy and keeping his legacy going. He was doing this really incredible work on the situation of Black men and healing trauma. That was a new addition to his work on Lukman Nation. And he was just a staunch anti-imperialist, Black liberation stalwart. I mean, there's not enough good things to say about him, but I don't know if, Margaret, if you wanted to say anything. I just want to say before you go, actually, Margaret, that below in the description of this video, you can find their Twitter page, which has both a way to support them as well as information of his services if you choose to stream that. I know they will be streaming his services. But Margaret, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to add my, condolences to Jackie Lukman, who's lost her husband and her partner in life, her best friend, and they were really hitting their stride with Lukman Nation. And as you said, we had great conversation with them. It's always such a shock. It was sudden, and that always makes it harder, on a personal level. I always find it difficult to deal with death that comes unexpectedly. I guess all of us do, right? But
Yeah.
they were, he was just a very nice person, and Jackie's a lovely person too. So I send my condolences to her and to Abdus's entire family. And please take a look at, as Danny was saying, where you can see their work and perhaps send some support, because as we know, at times like these, families need some help. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, one of our people in the chat before I keep going said, Margaret, you might be a little low in your mic. I don't know if you could go to the little tool.
Better?
Oh, yeah. I think that is better.
Thank you. My mic was just pointed in the wrong direction.
Oh, awesome. Okay, well, you sound a lot louder now.
Okay, cool.
Which is great. So last announcement, because I definitely want to get to our guests before we spend too much more time. I am co-founder, co-editor of a new project called Friends of Socialist China. This Saturday, we are holding a very early event for those of us who happen to be in the United States, but nevertheless, it's worth going to. It will cover poverty alleviation And as a way to celebrate the Communist Party of China's 100th anniversary, we will be collaborating with Geopolitical Economy Research Group, which is run in Manitoba, and the great Radhika Desai, Marxist scholar and activist. She helps head that. She will be moderating the event, and we have wonderful speakers talking about this from China to Nigeria. Also, our special guest, who I will announce in just a second, will also be a speaker talking about the Latin American perspective on this question. And we're just going to celebrate this historic achievement. So please join us the 26th of June. You can register in the Eventbrite in the description of this video. And that will be at 9 a.m. to June 26th, 9 a.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. British time. I know 6 a.m. if you're out in California, 6 a.m. Pacific time. But please do join and register again in the link in the description. In any event, though, I want to waste no further time in introducing Camila Escalante, who is someone I've been following for quite a while. She was wonderful enough to have me on from the South, Telesur. Now she is one of the co-founders of Casacho News, and she reports out of Bolivia, but is often traveling, giving the perspective of the left in Latin America. So with no further ado, Camila, how are you doing? It's wonderful to have you. Oh, you're muted.
You're right. I did that.
No worries.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's great to see you guys.
Yeah, no, it's really great to see you. So, well, I'm just going to keep this broad because I know you're doing a lot of work and there's a lot to cover. We probably can't cover it all in the next 45 minutes to an hour. But Latin America has been somewhat on fire. I mean, the world has been on fire with the crises, economical pandemic, the endless wars. But Latin America has, in the last few years alone, I mean, we've seen recently the unfortunate loss by Andres Aroaz in Ecuador. We saw also good, positive developments, the reversal of the 2019 coup in Bolivia, which I know you covered heavily, and I know Casacho News is deeply embedded in the Coca Union in Bolivia, headed by Evo Morales. And we are also seeing escalating sanctions on Nicaragua, sanctions on Venezuela continue to hurt the left-wing government there. And there was this whole conversation of a pink tide over the last 2 or so decades that I think many people thought was dead, but there's been a resurgence of sorts, and nowhere is this more clear than I think in Peru, where Pedro Castillo, the left-wing candidate there, has officially won after, I don't know, more than a week of waiting for the official results. And we know the Fujimori, she's going to be contesting that, but I don't know where you want to begin, Camila, because I think our audience really could use, definitely, we haven't been covering it enough, I feel like, a kind of a primer on what's going on in Latin America. So I'll let you start in terms of what you feel like is appropriate and what's really on your mind right now in terms of developments there and the state of the left and the struggle against imperialism.
Yeah, you're right. At Casacho News, we cover a whole lot of territory, as has been the case, at my work, my previous work at Telesur English. I mean, we're in charge of covering the entire region, so sometimes it's a lot to follow up on. But this week, the headline for South America, at least, is the bicentennial of the Battle of Carabobo, which was a very important battle in Venezuela, in Carabobo, of course, led by Simón Bolívar, which was important because it led to the independence of Venezuela and the rest of the region. So, in commemoration of that, there are a lot of major events and very important and interesting political and social leaders and social movements in Venezuela this week for the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World. And there are some comrades of yours from the United States too, I'm sure. I've spoken to a couple of them. Danny Shaw is one of them. Some other people from New York. just some like great people who we've been in contact with through their solidarity with Bolivia. And so this is a 4-day Congress, 3 or 4-day Congress, where there are about 300 delegates from 5 continents, mostly representing social movements and leftist political parties. And it's really, it's very important to have these sorts of meetings in Venezuela, particularly right now, that Venezuela is, continues to be under siege. And as President Nicolas Maduro has told us, very recently, he had an interview with a journalist from Bloomberg. I don't know if you guys saw that, but it's been completely voiced over in English. So you can watch that in English or in Spanish. And he says that, under the Biden administration, there has been virtually no change in terms of the Biden administration's foreign policy towards Venezuela, specifically from the previous administration of Donald Trump. And, they still continue to, the State Department, the White House continues to recognize this, this figure who is no longer even an acting lawmaker or even the leader of the opposition, because there are several oppositions in Venezuela, Juan Guaido. And so nothing has concretely changed. The United States tries to claim that they'll be, open to dialogue around lifting some of the economic sanctions, if Nicolas Maduro concedes, to certain demands of theirs. But of course, this is just absolutely ridiculous, because we know that, the only thing Venezuela is guilty of is fighting to defend its sovereignty, protecting its people and its own interests from U.S. interests. It's guilty of cooperation with other global South countries. And it's guilty of being, having an anti-imperialist government that is socialist, and, for maintaining those important links to the other leftist governments and other anti-imperialist governments of the region and world. So it's really important to have all of, this representation of social movements and leftist forces in Venezuela right now. It continues to be, I don't know, I think Margaret has gone. I'm not sure. Danny, have you been to Venezuela?
No, I've not.
Oh, neither of you have. Or
No, it's actually
Okay.
a deep regret. I've been to Cuba for a week, which was incredible, but no, I've not been to Venezuela just yet. I really want to go.
It's been for a few years now. It's been very difficult to go to Venezuela. There are just fewer and fewer flights. The blockade discourages all types of businesses from engaging in any sort of economic activity with Venezuela, because, private companies are afraid that they themselves will be sanctioned. And this is private companies from, the region. Most of the way you would get to Venezuela would normally be through, private air carriers that are based in other Latin American countries. But it also discourages European and other countries from engaging in business with Venezuela as well. And so there are so few flights to get there. It's basically, the blockade is so far reaching in its effects that it's even difficult to be in solidarity with Venezuela. You basically have to buy one ticket to, one of 3 cities where they actually fly. Conviasa flights are still allowed. So you have to buy like one ticket to Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and then you have to get a second ticket to Venezuela. They give you a really hard time at the airport. You guys may have heard that on delegations, people have, been like interrogated and just had really ridiculous, run-ins with like the airlines themselves, just scrutinizing everyone for why they're going to Venezuela, what they're doing in Venezuela. So it's really difficult. And so it's great to see all those people there. And this is, of course, like you said, this comes at a time when, the continental left throughout, at least South America is seeing, a big, has kind of a hop in its step after a couple of uprisings we've seen. and a couple, some articulation we're seeing within the social movements and also within the establishment left, the political left, the more mainstream leftist parties are also seeing some, electoral potential. And so, in the case of Ecuador, a lot of people, like you said, Andres Arauz believed that Arauz, who was running on behalf of the Citizens Revolution, which is the leftist, it's not a party, but it was the movement led by the former president Rafael Correa. Most people thought he was going to win, but nevertheless, unfortunately, the neoliberal candidate Guillermo Lasso won there, but it did bring together a lot of forces. And I think that the people who, casted a null vote or who maybe didn't support Arauz so forcefully, I think they're beginning to realize that, that having such a divided and fractioned left, has had terrible consequences, and that they're going to have to build a much broader coalition for the next elections. That being said, as you mentioned, Pedro Castillo wasn't even within the top 5 in Peru prior to the first round of presidential elections there. So the media hadn't covered him. A lot of people didn't really know who he was internationally. And this candidate, in a sea of candidates, most of which were from the right wing, Pedro Castillo ended up coming in first in the first round of Peru's presidential elections on April 11th. So he went forward with Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of the former Alberto Fujimori, the former dictator in Peru, and those two had a runoff that was just held on June 6th. So in the June 6th election, of course, Pedro Castillo came out as winner, and Fujimori, who is absolute tyrant and neoliberal authoritarian by all measures, has refused to concede defeat. It was a very slim margin. We're just talking about 50,000 votes difference, but there's the same margin that we saw in the previous elections, in which Keiko Fujimori also lost against another right-wing candidate, but she also claimed that there was fraud in that case, but she did concede that time. So, they're trying to steal the election. They're trying to, Keiko Fujimori and the establishment in Peru, along with the right-wing media and all of their international neoliberal allies, are trying to steal this election victory from the Peruvian people and their chosen candidate, Pedro Castillo. And I think, the people are going to fight to defend it. And even if he takes office and is sworn in, as he should be, as president elected by the people, he'll be facing a very difficult time trying to govern with so many, so many attacks from the media, that characterize the entire presidential election campaign. So it's going to be a fight there as well. We also, some of the other things that we'll be covering, just to list some things, and I'll let you guys maybe ask me a question. I'm in El Salvador, and I'll be heading over to Nicaragua, and that's because Nicaragua is under, escalating attacks from the United States and the OAS, because Nicaragua will be holding its own elections, presidential elections, in November, and it looks like the Sandinista government is likely going to be reelected. President Daniel Ortega is the favorite to win, and the polls have shown this. And so, the United States and the State Department sees this as kind of, an opportunity for them to try to delegitimize this electoral process. And what they don't want to do is to have two Venezuelas. Their entire coup efforts against Venezuela have failed to the point where they have to just starve and suffocate the country to death with sanctions. And that's all they can do, because nobody recognizes the puppet they tried to install. Even European countries are, they just call him Guaido. They just call him opposition figure. Nobody calls him, constitutional interim de facto president or anything like that anymore. Everyone has just totally dropped the act. And so, they don't want this situation to happen in Nicaragua where they have to install their own president or say that they don't recognize the Nicaraguan government. What they want to do is, destabilize the country through these sanctions that they're now imposing on figures of the Nicaraguan government, which we know the sanctions are actually on the Nicaraguan population, not just individuals of, high-ranking individuals of the government. And they're trying to destabilize the country, and they're going to try to call the election invalid, illegitimate, and they won't be recognizing the results. And we're seeing them go through all the steps right now to delegitimize the entire process. And so, solidarity with Nicaragua, the Nicaraguan people, is extremely important right now. So we, Saskatchewan News, will be headed there in order to begin to cover, the events of the electoral calendar and report what's going on there. Because, the information in English on Latin America, as we know, has always been one-sided. And in terms of Nicaragua, the only thing you're seeing online on social media, with some exceptions, of course, Ben Norton and the Gray Zone are probably the major exception. Most all other sources of information on Nicaragua is going to always be in English against the democratically elected popular government and against the Sandinista revolution. And they're just echoes of the State Department line. And so it's very important for just us to get on the ground there and begin to report what we see and what's really going on there.
Camila, you mentioned that the Biden administration is following the Trump administration policy in Venezuela, for example. But Obama handed it all over to Trump. In Obama's last days in office, last couple of weeks he was in office, he repeated that Venezuela was a security threat to the United States and should be sanctioned. Trump ramped up those sanctions, of course. But then Biden comes in, and it's not just Venezuela, it's all over the world, where essentially the foreign policy consensus does not change. The two parties are one when it comes to asserting America's, I should say the U.S., it's all America, right? U.S. hegemony over the rest of the world. Do people, I know now that Biden's in, people see that. Was there hope after Trump lost that things might change?
I think anyone who looks at the situation realistically, for example, we work with the union that Evo Morales runs or leads in Bolivia, and we speak to political and social leaders in Bolivia. I think anyone who's been following the situation, for a long time knows that it's unrealistic to believe that anything can change. And the one thing that people were hopeful about was that Biden's, policy towards Cuba would be favorable towards the normalization of relations between the United States and Cuba, the way in which relations were to some extent normalized towards the end of Obama's administration. That was the only thing that, I think anyone who realistically looks at the situation throughout the different administrations could hope would have happened. But that's absolutely not happening right now. Somehow Biden's policy towards Latin America, if it's even possible, just seems to be even more extreme in some senses than the administration that he worked with under Obama. And so, it's absolutely the case that they just hand on the torch to every single administration that comes through, and that there are no real changes. And this is, illustrated and can be seen at the U.S. embassies and consulates around the world. Like in the case of Bolivia, for example, when there was a coup, but this would happen if there was a transition between, an elected government and then another elected government came into power. You always see let's say, right-wing government comes to power, for example, once a left-wing government is elected, they get rid of everyone and all of the embassies. They get rid of all of the ministers. They change everybody in every agency and every government institution because they have fundamental differences in their views of how the country should be run. There are so many ideological differences. You would never just be able to leave somebody, as ambassador to, let's say, ambassador to China. You wouldn't be able to leave necessarily the same person for very long. In most cases, the left-wing government wants to bring in their own people. The right-wing government comes and they just overturn, all of those decisions, and they install their own people. In the case of the United States, I mean, you just see a continuation throughout different administrations of the same people working for the Foreign Service. So the same person in the Lima embassy in Peru was basically the person who worked right underneath Mike Pompeo at the State Department. And this is someone who has spent decades working in the Foreign Service, including 9 years at the CIA. They worked just a very impressive CV at different embassies. They speak Arabic and all sorts of other languages. And they had, top positions at the State Department and at the White House. And now the person is stationed in Lima. They were appointed by President Trump, but they're now Biden's ambassador. And that's not going to change. I mean, in what way, are they operating any differently under President Biden as they did under the administration of Trump? In no ways at all. I mean, they're just carrying the torch through multiple. These people worked under Bush. They worked under Obama. So, absolutely in no way does the U.S. foreign policy with regards to Latin America specifically change over time. It remains the same. Sometimes it worsens. And, this siege on Nicaragua is only worsening right now. And of course, because the OAS, which is just an extension of Washington, well, it's based in Washington, and of course, run by someone who works on behalf of the United States government, Luis Almagro. He doesn't change positions. They don't ask for another leader to help intervene in the colonies, in the U.S. colonies and protectorates. They maintain that same structure. And so, as does the Lima cartel, which is not so active anymore. But these different extensions of the U.S. government, which are just used to attack Venezuela and attack leftist governments, are maintained throughout all administrations. So there's absolutely no change at all whatsoever. I think it's really important for people to understand that. And I think our audiences are beginning to understand that more and more, that, what these different agencies of the United States do, such as USAID, is they just take money from the U.S. government and they funnel them to the various organizations on the ground that will help, help in the battle to secure their interests on the ground. So we have, young people who are, let's say, 21-year-old young women, if they're trying to apply for a university program where they can learn how to do journalism in the country they live in. Let's say they're here in El Salvador. First of all, the level of potential for opportunity and a high earning career in countries of the global South, like El Salvador, is just very low. I mean, imagine doing the work that all of us do, the three of us do, writing, journalism, reporting, social media, and making, $300 a month. And that's the most you can make if you're lucky to be employed on that basis. If they get recruited into one of these NGOs, one of these organizations that receives money from USAID, from the US State Department, they could make $3,000 a month. So they're making almost a salary that you guys should be making at a minimum there in the United States. So, there's so much more opportunity, but then you're surrounded by people who are, pushing this pro-US line, these State Department lines. You're getting kind of, ushered into certain jobs where you work with these more mainstream outlets, or sometimes, less mainstream outlets, maybe some like think tanks or things like that. but who continue to push that same State Department line. And this is a great opportunity. People see it as a really great opportunity because, you know, they spend so much money on university, and where are they going to find a job like that in their country? So, I mean, it's just this entire network, this entire economy of pumping out, you know, jobs for people, positions for people who will work in the interest of the United States, against the interests of anti-imperialist governments, and against the real, genuine, and authentic popular movements of the country.
Yeah, well, thank you for that analysis. I mean, I think it's so important to hear about how this all works concretely, how the USAID and how the United States really exerts its interest to reproduce the neo-colonial situation in a lot of these countries that, you know, is being really fought against. I mean, I think that's one of the themes of this resurgence of the left, is there is this struggle against these neo-colonial structures, this neoliberal economic order, which all of these institutions serves to reproduce. But Camila, let's talk about the why. What you know, why is the United States and its allies, the United States in particular, especially in Latin America and across the Americas, why is it so hell bent on subverting these left-wing governments? I'm picking up an echo. I don't know if anyone can also hear that. Oh, all right. But let's get into the why. Because it's a pattern everywhere, and I'm sure we're going to see this in Peru. You already said that there's going to be a hard-fought battle there that's going to be ongoing. The United States, you know, sanctions Nicaragua, Venezuela, and it seems like anytime we know that the United States was involved in the coup in Brazil of Dilma Rousseff, we know it's very close to the Jair Bolsonaro government. We know, across the continent, across the Americas, that the United States is doing this. But what is it about this left-wing movement that threatens them so much? I mean, to me, Venezuela was so critical in my own political development because it was one of these really radical movements that was winning something for the people in my lifetime. Because I mean, I'm a child of the post-Soviet era, and we really haven't seen, and well, a lot of us haven't seen victories globally or domestically, for that matter, here in the United States, where people's lives have improved. But when I started learning about Venezuela, it was quite clear that conditions, especially with the disgusting neoliberal austerity imposed on Venezuela prior to 1998-99, prior to Hugo Chavez's victory, that life has really improved, at least until the sanctions rolled back a lot of the gains, at least economically. So tell me, what is it that threatens the United States so much? And if you could just go over, I know you cover Bolivia really intensely lately, but you and Ollie have been, but Ollie Vargas. But if you just maybe give a kind of a broad sweeping analysis of that to give our viewers an idea of why it's so critical to defend the left and the left struggle in Latin America.
Well, I think you guys know just as well as I do that the United States is against a multipolar world. They want to maintain their sphere of influence, their own words, in Latin America, in the hemisphere. And my good comrade, Nino Paglia, who is a Venezuelan Canadian in Vancouver, he posted on Facebook, and I tweeted it from my personal account. He said, "My reading of geopolitics tells me that we're moving towards a multipolar world where the United States and its cronies are left behind. So much work to do, and it will be done. Empires have fallen before." And I mean, this is exactly what they're afraid of, and this is exactly what's happening. We see different governments standing up for themselves. They're not only afraid of, the Venezuelan and President Nicolas Maduro's assertion of their right to self-determination and sovereignty. It's not only that it's not only that they feel threatened by Nicaragua and the Sandinista government, or the Cuban Revolution, or Evo Morales and the party he leads and the social movements he leads. It's also these kind of like center leftist governments in in Mexico, in Argentina. Then you have, popular candidates and candidates who are polling, with very high numbers in, voter intention surveys in Colombia, with Gustavo Petro, with Lula, who's going to retake power and win the elections now that he's had his political rights restored after facing lawfare in Brazil. He will inevitably be supported by the social movements and a huge cross section of the country, and the Workers' Party and the people of Brazil will take back power from Bolsonaro once again in next year's elections. So we're seeing this all across the continent. And then at the same time, these popular parties and movements and these leftist governments are forming these very important bonds, and they are engaging in, bilateral cooperation and strengthening relations with the governments of Iran, of China, and numerous other countries in the Middle East, in Africa, and in Asia. And this is extremely, threatening to the United States. But what's worse is that, Hugo Chavez built up this whole ALBA, Bolivarian Alliance, and all these other institutions, Telesur, the Petrocaribe program. And now, Venezuela and Cuba are very close to numerous governments in the Caribbean. This is extremely threatening to the United States because these countries in the Caribbean are not necessarily all led by people who call themselves Marxists. I mean, probably the only one who calls himself a Marxist is the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Comrade Ralph Gonsalves is probably the only one who would really call himself, and the Prime Minister of Dominica as well, Roosevelt Skerrit. But beyond that, they would just say that they're, people's governments, they're just democratic governments. But they have repeatedly rejected meddling by the United States in the region. They have repeatedly rejected interference and the threat of military intervention in and around Venezuela. And they have rejected, the militarization, the different Southcom operations that have been taking place there in the Caribbean region, just outside Venezuela, under the pretext of this war against drugs, against narco trafficking, when really it's all their allies that are known narco states and narco governments. So it's just absolutely unbelievable. By their own studies, of course, the DEA, the US DEA, and basically all other statements and reports made by other institutions and agencies of the United States government has made it perfectly clear that the vast majority of drug interceptions that they've made successfully have been on the complete opposite waters, which is the Pacific coast, not the Atlantic. So it has nothing to do with Venezuela. The largest producer and exporter of cocaine in the world is Colombia. The second is Peru. And both of those are, taking the drug dealers, or the transnational criminal organizations are taking drugs up the Pacific coast, right? Towards, that part of Mexico, and of course, San Diego and California, which is not where Venezuela is. Venezuela is on the other side of the continent. And then, they're also tracing these lines, these routes where the drugs are moving towards, and they literally, the drugs are moving directly by their own charts from Colombia to Honduras, a narco state. Like, they're going directly for, through all of the countries which are close allies, if not colonies, because they've completely surrendered their entire, their sovereignty and everything, territory in some case, over to the United States government. Those are the true enablers of narco trafficking. And so, these Caribbean nations and their leaders are saying that, Oh, I think someone's right near an ambulance there.
Sorry.
Okay, it's getting kind of loud. So yeah, these Caribbean nations are saying, I don't know why you're meddling with trying to intervene with the internal matters in Venezuela. If there are some political problems, then the people of Venezuela need to sort it out themselves. They need to sort their problems out at the ballot box or internally, but this doesn't involve a foreign government, and it definitely doesn't involve, or doesn't require any foreign military intervention in the region. So this is exactly what they're afraid of. People are standing up for themselves. Countries and their governments are beginning to stand up for themselves, even ones that aren't necessarily socialist. And they're trying to intercept that because they're just losing. They're losing their capacity to control all of these different countries. And if you just look at what has gone on in terms of the electoral scenario in Latin America and South America, and where the polls are indicating things are going to go, we could see several governments flip, from neoliberal governments back to leftist governments in the period of a year and a half, let's say. And this is just going to be absolutely devastating for the United States. And they believe that it's just going to, subvert the entire continent to the influence of China and Russia. And China and Russia will just come and control all of the Americas. I mean, we can only hope. This is what some people would say, because of course, they're absolutely just having a fit because, of what the United States State Department, the Department of Defense, Trump himself, everyone was just having an absolute, breakdown over so-called vaccine diplomacy, the fact that Russia and China said they were going to help all the different Latin American nations, some of which are leftist governments, sure, like Venezuela, like Luis Arce in Bolivia, but others are not right-wing at all, or not left-wing at all. They're neoliberal governments, and they were accepting the help during, immediately when vaccines started being produced and manufactured. These countries had no choice but to accept the help of Russia and China, including these neoliberal governments. And they didn't just say they were going to help; they actually did. They allowed these governments to make purchases at very low cost, and they also made massive donations, and they actually showed up, unlike in the case of the COVAX mechanism and things like this, which didn't really come in a timely manner. I mean, it's great that exists, but how is that going to help anyone when half the global north is vaccinated, and in the global south and Latin America, it's like less than 10% of the population, right? So this is just absolutely devastating for them. They see China engaging in these, these collaborative projects where they're, helping to build infrastructure in various countries of Central and South America and the Caribbean. And they are just having an absolute breakdown over that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the vaccines. There was last week, it was pretty funny. The U.S. Embassy in Trinidad, they actually made an announcement that the U.S. was sending 80 vials of vaccine to Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the Chinese had just sent the first of 200,000 doses, and but that's the contradiction of an empire. They cannot meet people's needs, and at this point they can't even pretend to meet people's needs. So rather than not say anything, they made a big deal out of 80 vials, which was treated, rightly so, as a big joke. But it's funny what you say about the it's interesting what you're saying about the threat, in answer to Danny's question, that the United States feels so threatened by left-wing governments. One of the reasons they feel threatened is they don't want people in this country to see that their lives could be better, to see that they could have governments that meet their needs. The first thing we're told, even mild reforms, is, well, that's socialism, and socialism doesn't work. Look at Venezuela. Socialism doesn't work. Nobody mentions that the United States has declared war by other means against Venezuela. The continuing story of asylum seekers at the border, uh, hardly any of them are Nicaraguan. They're from all the countries that the United States considers friends and allies and countries they want to showcase. But it's Nicaragua, the country, the Central American country that the U.S. Hates the most, that is actually doing the best at caring for its people. So that is part of America's fear, that people here will see that there is another way, that we don't have to live in this dog eat dog system, have this duopoly, which actually two parties who support the same interests. So I just wanted to point that out. That's another reason that the United States feels so threatened by any government that actually meets the needs of its people. That's why China has been targeted, because China is also an economic power that challenges the United States, which had a goal of lifting millions of people out of poverty and did it. So we can see that that's another reason that the U.S. Declares enemies in the region and, in fact, around the world.
That's exactly it. And so this news is coming out right now, obviously in the Spanish world, and we're putting out our article on it in just a moment's time. But over the weekend, when nobody was paying attention, we reported that Cuba came out with, the independent study that verified the efficacy of the Soberana 2, their first vaccine, Latin America's first vaccine, showed 62% efficacy in a 2-dose schedule, and this is and it's going to have a much higher efficacy rate once the third dose, which is a booster shot, is applied. And this is, of course, a U.S. sanctioned country that has been blockaded for several decades now, with the absolute minimal amount of funding, and just so resource scarce. They were able to develop this vaccine in 13 months, and today they're reporting that a 3-dose schedule of the Abdala vaccine, which is another, because there are 5 vaccines being manufactured in Cuba right now, all of them undergoing clinical trials at different stages, that the Abdala vaccine has now been shown to have 92.28%, so over 92% efficacy in a 3-dose schedule. And this is just absolutely unbelievable, amazing news. Cuba will be manufacturing these vaccines against COVID-19 with Venezuela, with Iran. Both of those countries have participated in some of the clinical trials, or will be participating in the clinical trials of some of these vaccines. And they will be, the country of just over 10 million people is going to be able to be vaccinated in a very short amount of time, a record amount of time, because they're going to, for the most part, manufacture these vaccines in the country itself, vaccinate the entire population, and then provide vaccines for other countries of the global South whose governments have not been able to get a hold of COVID vaccines because of the patents, and all the different challenges associated with not having any money, so this is just an unbelievable development. And the United States is just so heavily reliant on its propaganda arms of the mainstream media to make sure that all of these very important developments are masked, that people have the access to a high quality public health services, that they're able to, get injured or get in a car accident and not have to pay money and get treated, have the best emergency services. The United States doesn't want people to know that, that Cuba has, completely eliminated illiteracy, and that people have such a high level of education, which is free, and, post-secondary education that is such a high quality that people from all around the continent and world, largely from other Latin American countries, the Caribbean and Africa, go to Havana, go to Cuba to get a university education, to become doctors, and that the country provides this for, people from all over the world at, for no cost. And so, yeah, the people of the United States are not allowed to know this, but the information is slowly getting out. And so it's just an unbelievable feat for the Cuban people, and hopefully that'll soon reach us, and all the rest of the countries of Latin America that have been deprived of this. I think, you probably saw our reporting during the coup. The coup took place in November 2019 in Bolivia, and literally that same month, I don't know, within days, Áñez, the coup dictator, backed by the United States, kicked out the Cuban doctors from Bolivia. Jair Bolsonaro did the same, and that is just unbelievable when you look at the kind of country Bolivia is. They made huge strides under Evo Morales and the MAS government, under the process of change, bringing people out of extreme poverty, and giving people access to crucial infrastructure, building roads, all these sorts of projects and social programs over the period of 14 years in which Evo Morales was in power. But unfortunately, one thing you can't do overnight is, increase the population of doctors, qualified doctors and specialists in a country. Even if you're able to, expand public education, and, give people more access to internet and technology and things like that in their schools and in their homes. I mean, you're not going to it takes years to become a doctor, and, you need to have these specialized programs. And so the health, the health infrastructure, the public health system in Bolivia is nowhere near what it is in, what it should be, what it is in countries of the global north. And they relied very heavily on the permanent Cuban medical missions that were stationed there in Bolivia, who were then kicked out under the coup regime for a year. And I think they've not been able to bring them back yet, because some of the doctors in Bolivia, the Bolivian doctors, are from the right wing, and they're threatening the government if they bring back the Bolivian doctors, because they want to keep the system completely privatized and for profit, whereas the Cubans come and are part of the public system, and they provide a very high quality service at no cost for people. But in the areas where predominantly indigenous Bolivians live, there are no health services. There are no specialized health services. Definitely nowhere near what you would need to be able to treat a severe case of COVID-19. And that's the sort of thing that Cuban doctors and specialists are trained to do, is work in these work under pandemics, work under, these sorts of conditions where people have, malaria or other very life-threatening, serious diseases and stuff. So, they kicked them out. And so it's so obvious that these kind of massive feats of socialism are seen as a huge threat to the United States and its narrative.
For sure. Wow, that was a master class on the situation and on just this antagonism between the progress that Latin America, that the Americas has really been making, and the response by imperialism to prevent that. And it's just so important that we realize this. I remember during the pandemic, and we're coming to the close of our live stream. So I'll definitely let you jump in, Margaret, after I just say a few words. During the height of the pandemic here in the United States, New York City was the epicenter. Margaret and I are both here. And I remember just following the situation in Venezuela and how a country such as Venezuela sanctioned starvation sanctions on Venezuela imposed by the United States. Yet still the government made a commitment to pay everyone, to provide healthcare as it had been doing ever since the Bolivarian Revolution, provide healthcare free of cost, and to really take this thing seriously to the point where Venezuela did much better than the United States with the pandemic, despite all of the limitations, all of the restrictions, all the extreme poverty that was imposed, reimposed on Venezuela because of these sanctions. Still, the government and the people came together and are still fighting this pandemic, but have done so in a much better way. And it's these kind of gains, this kind of capacity, especially among the state. I think that they're sometimes in the United States and the West, there's a lot of like this anarchistic thinking, this kind of individualistic thinking, where there's just this skepticism over the state. And in Bolivia and in Venezuela, Ecuador, everywhere, I mean, the battle really is for power, state power, and what that state will look like in these particular countries. And in those countries that have made more progress in the realm of the indigenous people, Afro descendants of the continent of the Americas, the workers, the peasants, where they've made the most gains, depending on whatever country, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, we've seen just immense progress in terms of social uplift and the well-being of people. And in places like Peru, where Peru was hit devastatingly hard by the pandemic, and I think is one of the reasons why Pedro Castillo was able to have such a larger base than I think a lot of his establishment naysayers thought, is because there is just none of this capacity. It is a neoliberal nightmare in so many ways. The reports there were just devastating. And Brazil, one of the worst hit countries, because the Bolsonaro government and before that the coup government ran roughshod over all of the public safety net, the social sectors, the privatization that goes on in these countries. That's the struggle. And then you brought it, I think, to the place of this more internationalist outlook where, yeah, Russia and China are providing an alternative. And I think Latin America is one of the places where you really see it. I'm really excited for you, Camila, to come on to the Friends of Socialist China event and talk about the Latin American perspective on poverty alleviation, because there's so many connections to be had. But I'll let Margaret, if you have anything to close, and then of course, Camila, I'll let you have the last word after that.
Well, we have fake poverty alleviation here. We had a lot of propaganda claiming that Biden was cutting child poverty in half when no such thing was true. So we've got propaganda instead of the real thing. That our work as left journalists is so important for obvious reasons. The corporate media here parrot all the state talking points on Latin America, on the whole world, actually. And that's why it's so important that Black Agenda Report exists, that Kausachu News exists. What would you say are, I know we've talked about a lot of different issues, and we've really spanned North and South America here. But if you had to point to one thing that people in this country should be paying attention to in the near future, what would you say? I know it's a lot of things, but if you had to mention just one or two things that come to mind first, what would those be?
Paying attention to in our region in Latin America.
Yeah.
Is that it? Wow. I mean, I would say that, this revival and rearticulation of the social movements of Latin America, that, it went through this phase in the period of Chavez and Kirchner and Lula and Dilma Rousseff, when they were founding ALBA TCP, the Bolivarian Alliance, and ALBA Movimientos, and all these different institutions. It kind of cooled down for a little bit, but it's coming there's a huge resurgence, and people are understanding that the enemy is neoliberalism, is capitalism, is imperialism, and information is just becoming the fact is just becoming way too obvious. And our job as Chaos Astro News has been to, so far, kind of simplify things, provide readily available information on some of the developments and things that are going on in Latin America, and in the most accessible, general way possible in English, so that people can understand what's going on. But there's so many other layers that are necessary in order for people to understand what's going on. And recently, the Center for Economic and Policy Research, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, came out with a study that showed the ways in which Janine Áñez in Bolivia, under the year-long coup, completely came in to ransack the Bolivian state for their own personal gain, but also, in order to install this neoliberal dictatorship and these neoliberal policies that just were so starkly different from what the movement towards socialism had in place during the previous 14 years. And that it was dire for the Bolivian economy, through their analysis of the numbers of unemployment, underemployment, through their analysis of the different kinds of policies that were passed, the types of loans that were sought. They demonstrate that literally the day the Áñez regime took power, they just wanted to completely annihilate every social program, every social gain of the previous socialist government in record time. And this is exactly how all neoliberal regimes operate. And I think that, on the very grassroots level, people are beginning to understand that it's always going to be like that with every neoliberal government, every right-wing government. And the only chance that we have in order to secure a different alternative is to, through these processes of electoral politics and through these different uprisings, is to take popular power in every single country. And people are sharing their different but similar experiences across borders: indigenous groups, campesino, rural groups, more like urban social movements. And so this articulation is going to be very powerful, really important. And this is exactly what Evo Morales, the former president of Bolivia, who is now essentially the leader of Latin America's social movements in many ways, because he is a leader of a union, one of the most important and a very large union in Bolivia. And he's also someone who, has a lot of years of internationalism and solidarity between different countries. So this is kind of what he's leading right now. And so this is going to be extremely interesting. If you've heard, one of the reasons why we wanted to get so many leftists elected to the presidency and to governments in Latin America is to bring back UNASUR. Well, the UNASUR headquarters in Cochabamba, Bolivia, is going to be a new headquarters for the convergence of social movements of our continent. This is really exciting. And they kind of had a meeting in December, but then, another wave of COVID came. But a big social movement gathering is going to happen in September, this upcoming September. And it's just going to be extremely important. And I hope that some organizers from the United States and from the global North are able to come and attend and do exchanges, so that we can know what's going on there in the global North, how people are learning, what kind of study groups people are doing, what examples they're looking at, what the struggles look like on the ground there, and so that people can learn what things are like here. This is a very exciting development.
Well, I think people here can learn from people in the rest of the world. The left here needs to be in greater solidarity so that we don't succumb to the propaganda that I just described. And we learn from the people who are doing the things that we need to start doing.
Indeed,
absolutely.
Indeed.
But it has to go all ways, because of course we believe that revolution has to be done where you are. So we can't just wait for, the wonderful, amazing Brazilian people to overthrow their fascist
Right.
government. We have to be doing it wherever we are, and that includes
Right.
in the global north. Of course,
Yes,
I don't
absolutely.
look to the U.S. for inspiration by no means, but I do think that this, sort of exchange will be very important in the future.
Of course.
And I think that, this Bicentennial Congress in Venezuela, for example, where I'm sure there'll be translators and different people who can kind of facilitate that communication, will be, extremely important.
Of course, yes. Well, we're about out of time, but this was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Camila. I hope everyone looks forward to everything that you are doing now and in the future, and we'll hear your remarks on the 26th of June for Friends of Socialist China. And this was a great interview. What you said definitely resonates. As much as the movement in the United States is at this very weak inflection point, I think it's so important that we all learn from each other, because there's so much to learn, including just how much we have to learn here from people abroad who are doing it in all parts of the world, but also what we need to do here in the United States, in the belly of the empire, to to make revolution where we are. Right, that's what Lenin said. You need to fight the government that you are being oppressed by. That's where we need to focus on. And we can learn so many lessons from those who are doing it elsewhere, especially since the United States, being the hegemon, is at the root of a lot of these struggles that are happening abroad. So it was really amazing to have you, for you to talk. I mean, it was kind of unfair of us to ask you to basically give a primer on Latin America, because there's so much.
Unfair.
Every
it's too much to talk about.
I know. Well, we're we're gonna be around to talk more about it, and to get more, to center in more on various struggles. So thank you so much for doing that. I mean, it was a great analysis. But do you want to give a plug on the work that you're doing to close? Well, while we end this stream.
Yeah, like you said, we're based in Bolivia, but I'm on the road. I'll be doing some reporting in Nicaragua, and we hope to cover the upcoming elections in Nicaragua. There's some regional elections that are very important in Venezuela happening in November, as well as the presidential elections in Honduras, which of course is still victim to the 2009 coup and has not been able to recover that democracy. So very important things happening this year. You can find us at Casashwin News. We're pretty active on Twitter. And of course, we're also on Facebook and Patreon, and our website, which was launched just a couple of months ago, casashwinnews.com.
Awesome. And some of that information, where you can find all that information, is in the description below. So thanks everyone for coming. This was a great stream, and this is our monthly stream. We'll be back with you next month, hopefully bringing on another amazing guest. Thank you so much again, Camila.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Peace.